In this video, I'll be covering how to upgrade dimension using a redeployment method. First thing I'll cover is why you would need to deploy a new instance to do an upgrade. Next, I will cover how to migrate your existing data to the new instance successfully. And lastly, if you're using Dimension Command, I'll cover a few steps that you need to do in order to get your fireboxes connected. As the title here says, the main reason to redeploy Dimension is to get a new Linux kernel in your Dimension server. A normal Dimension upgrade does not upgrade the underlying Linux kernel. If you have fireboxes that are running 12.8.2 update 1 or higher, it has an OpenSSH update in it for security reasons. However, if you are running this newer Firebox firmware, it will be unable to connect to Dimension instances that have the older Linux kernel. More specifically, it is the 4.14 kernel, and even if you had done a Dimension upgrade from version 2 or 2.1 up to 2.2, again, the regular upgrade does not upgrade the kernel, so you will still see the old 4.14 version on there. This can mean that when you do a security scan on your network, the Dimension server may show up as vulnerable because of the older kernel and the older OpenSSH version. So we need to redeploy Dimension in order to get onto the new kernel. I'll start here in the Windows Server Hyper-V Manager. First off, you can see I have my old Dimension server here that has the data I want, but I'll ignore that for now. I'll proceed by doing a new Dimension deployment. So I'll click New Virtual Machine, and then just click Next on the first wizard page. Give it a name for the new server that you want to use going forward. Leave it on Generation 1. For the startup memory, you need to put at least 4 gigs. If you can afford to put more, that'll be better. Set up the networking, and then on this screen, you need to use an existing disk, and this is where you select the new Dimension instance that you downloaded from the website. Once you're done with that, just click Finish on the wizard, and now the hardware settings need to be modified on that server. So I'll go ahead and click Settings, select Processor, and change the number of virtual processors to 2. Moving on, I need to add a new disk, and then click Add, and then click New. Use the VHDX format. Dynamically expanding is fine. And this disk that I'm creating is just going to be a throwaway disk. This is a blank disk that we will be using for the initial Dimension setup wizard. Do not select the data disk from your old Dimension server at this point. If you do so, you will lose all of your data. So go ahead and name this disk just anything that will indicate that you're going to throw it away after the wizard's complete, and set it to 40 gigs. That's the minimum Dimension needs for the wizard. Then go ahead and click Finish to exit the wizard, and then click OK to commit those hardware changes. Now the new Dimension server is configured correctly, so I'll go ahead and start it. Once it's started, I need to open up the console to find the IP address in order to connect to it with the web browser. As soon as I log in, I can see the IP address right here. I don't even have to type any commands. Moving on to the web browser, I'll connect to the HTTPS page for it. Bypass the certificate warning, and then log in with the default admin read-write credentials. Now I need to complete the Dimension setup wizard. I would highly recommend that you shut down your old Dimension server if it isn't already shut down. The reason for that is because you want to put in the correct IP address and authentication key that your fireboxes are currently logging to. This is your new Dimension server, so you want everything to be as accurate as possible. Then click Next, hit OK on the warning, and then it has a message here saying that you need to log in again now that the IP address information has been configured. After logging in again with the same credentials, I can click Next to skip over the IP address unless there's something I needed to correct here. And then here for the database, just leave the default built-in setting. This is going to format and wipe everything on that dummy data disk that we configured a moment ago in the Hyper-V Manager. Again, configure the IP address setting based on your real-world deployment. Set up a new admin passphrase, and then set up the authentication key that your fireboxes are currently using, since they will need to connect to the server in order to continue logging. If you need anonymized mode, enable it here. If everything looks good, go ahead and click Next. And you can see here it's setting up those parameters, and you can see that it is wiping the disk and setting up the Postgres database from scratch on that dummy disk that we created in the Hyper-V Manager. This is why we cannot attach the old data disk earlier than this point, because this wizard would wipe all of your data. And once that's all done, go ahead and click Finish to exit the wizard. And I'm just going to log in here to show you this is totally blank. There's no data, no devices, nothing. Back in the Hyper-V Manager, I'll shut down this new instance. And once it's shut down, I'm going to go to my old Dimension server, click on the current drive that is being used to hold my Dimension database, select the whole file path, including the name, copy that, close the window, go to the new Dimension server, go to the new hard drive where it shows the temporary disk that I created, and then paste the path to the old data disk that I just copied from the old Dimension server. Once that's done, I'll go ahead and click OK and start up the new Dimension server that is using the data disk from the old server. Now I'm going to go ahead and log into it from a different computer. And you can see here I have the firebox that was previously connected to the old server is now connected to the new server. And if I click on the firebox, I'll be able to see all of the log and report data that has been accumulating up to this point in time. So everything is intact and the firebox is still connected as expected. So that means my deployment of the new Dimension server is good and all my data is still intact. If I want to validate the kernel, I can click on the gear icon and then click on System Settings. You can see over on the left side there that I am running a Linux kernel that is newer than the 4.14 version that the older Dimension servers had. And once you've confirmed the kernel version, the next thing to do is configure the rest of the Dimension settings, such as the email server, notification messages from the firebox, and any other logging settings you may have been using on the old Dimension instance. If I have any fireboxes that are using Dimension Command, I need to do one more thing. On the right side here, you can see the Web Server Certificate Trust Chain. You can click on the Export button to get a copy of the new certificate that came with this new Dimension server. This is the certificate that will need to be imported onto a firebox that was using Dimension Command, because it no longer trusts the new server because the certificate doesn't match what was imported on the firebox. If your firebox still cannot connect after importing the new certificate, then you may need to generate a new .wgd file to import onto that firebox. Alternatively, if you have changed your Dimension server IP address or other parameters, then it is a good idea to use the WGD file instead of the certificate, because the WGD file contains all of the Dimension server information. However, it is easier to use the certificate option because you don't need to generate a unique file for every single firebox that's using Dimension Command. The one certificate works for all of them. Whereas with the WGD file, you need to go back to the home screen with the list of fireboxes, highlight the firebox, and then click Edit, and then you will see the config file option and a download button. That is where you can grab the .wgd file to import onto the firebox. Moving over to the WSM Policy Manager, to import either the certificate or the WGD file, you can go to Setup, Manage Device Settings, or simply press the letter M in Policy Manager to open up the Manage Device Settings window. Obviously, if your device is already connected with Dimension Command, the centralized management would be enabled. But this is where you can either import the WGD file up at the top or replace the certificate using the Browse button at the bottom. Once you've done that, just click OK and save to the Firebox. To wrap things up, you must redeploy Dimension in order to get the Linux kernel upgrade. Doing a standard upgrade with the apt file for Dimension will not upgrade the kernel. This will allow the fireboxes that use newer firmware to connect. So anything that is 12.8.2 update 1 or higher. When you deploy the new instance, remember that you need to create a new database during the setup wizard. Do not migrate your database over. If you move that data disk into the new Dimension server before you run the wizard, it will wipe all of your data. So just finish the wizard, get it up and running. Once it's done, then swap the data disk. And if you use Dimension Command, remember that you need to import the certificate from the new Dimension instance onto your fireboxes. And if that doesn't work, you can import a new WGD file.